Harold Shipman, the doctor who killed. He was a trusted doctor, a quiet man in a white coat, serving the tight-knit community of Hyde, Greater Manchester. But behind the familiar face of Dr. Harold Shipman hid the mind of a serial killer. Believed to have murdered over 200 patients, Shipman is the most prolific known serial killer in British history. And he did it all from behind a GP's desk, not with weapons, but with trust. Early life, the making of Harold Shipman. Harold Frederick Shipman was born in 1946 in Nottingham. He was bright, solitary, and unusually close to his mother Vera. When she developed terminal cancer, young Harold watched closely as her pain was relieved, with morphine injections administered at home by doctors. She died when he was just 17, and the image of a person slipping away, peacefully, under the influence of powerful drugs, stayed with him. A doctor with a dark secret, Shipman trained at Leeds School of Medicine and became a GP in the 1970s. Colleagues noted he was confident, sometimes arrogant, but capable. However, in 1975, he was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful opioid painkiller. He was fined and briefly suspended, but after completing rehab, he was allowed back into practice. This was the first missed warning. By the early 1980s, he was working in Hyde, Greater Manchester, where he'd stay for the rest of his career, and where, over the next 2 decades, he would commit hundreds of murders. The killing years, 1975 to 1998. Shipman's victims were mostly elderly women, many living alone. He would administer a fatal dose of diamorphine, often in their own homes, and then tell families they had died peacefully of natural causes. In many cases, he would certify the death himself, fill out the cremation forms, alter medical records to suggest the patient had been ill. To the grieving families, he was a comfort, but to those who began to look closer, his numbers didn't make sense. He had a disproportionately high death rate, with many patients dying in the middle of the day, often while alone with him. But it wasn't until 1998 that his crimes finally began to unravel, thanks to one determined woman. How Shipman was finally caught, the woman who wouldn't stay quiet. In June 1998, Shipman certified the death of Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old former mayoress of Hyde. She was fit, active, and widely known. Her sudden death raised some eyebrows, but Shipman said it was natural. No autopsy was done. The family trusted him. But when her daughter, Angela Woodruff, received a will stating that Kathleen had left her entire estate to Dr. Shipman, alarm bells rang. Angela, a solicitor, knew her mother's voice. And this was not it. The language was wrong. The typing style was odd. The will was clearly a forgery. She contacted the police. Exhumation and investigation. Kathleen Grundy's body was exhumed. Toxicology revealed she had died from a massive dose of diamorphine, a drug Shipman had never logged in her records. Police began reviewing other recent deaths under his care. Patterns emerged. Victims were mostly elderly women. Many died soon after a visit from Shipman. Cremation forms were signed without question. Medical notes were backdated and falsified. They discovered that Shipman had altered patient records to make deaths look natural, often entering new symptoms after the patient had already died. The typewriter and the list. When police raided Shipman's home in September 1998, they found the typewriter used to forge Kathleen Grundy's will, large supplies of diamorphine, detailed patient records, and a strange handwritten list of names and dates believed to be a record of his victims. This time the evidence was undeniable. A missed chance, the first warning. Earlier in 1998, a group of local undertakers had raised concerns. They noticed that too many of Shipman's patients were dying, often alone and in suspiciously similar ways. These concerns were passed to Coroner Linda Reynolds, who informed the police. But the officers conducting the first investigation failed to order any exhumations, didn't examine his prescription records thoroughly, and ultimately believed his explanations. Shipman dodged suspicion until Angela Woodruff pushed further, the trial and conviction. In January 2000, Shipman stood trial for 15 murders. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic experts showed how he'd altered records. Families testified to how he misled them. The forged will sealed his motive in Kathleen Grundy's case. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a whole life tariff, meaning he'd never be released. But official inquiries would later confirm what many feared. The real number of victims could be as high as 250. Shipman never confessed. He never explained why. Death and legacy. On January 13th, 2004, Shipman was found dead in his cell at Wakefield Prison, hanged with bed sheets the day before his 58th birthday. His suicide denied victims' families the truth, the confessions, and the closure they so desperately needed. The Shipman Inquiry and Reform. Following his death, the government launched the Shipman Inquiry, led by Dame Janet Smith. Over 2,000 cases were reviewed. The inquiry concluded that at least 215 people were murdered, but the number could be higher. The case led to sweeping reforms in the NHS and medical oversight. All deaths would now require more rigorous certification. A national controlled drugs register was introduced. GPs faced greater scrutiny and oversight. Shipman exploited gaps in the system, but his crimes forced the country to close them, remembering the victims. This isn't just the story of Harold Shipman. It's the story of Kathleen, Dorothy, Ivy, Ethel, Marie, and hundreds of others. Ordinary people, mums, grandmothers, neighbours, whose lives were cut short by someone they trusted. In Hyde, a memorial garden now stands, a quiet place to reflect. A reminder that we must always question power, even when it wears a white coat. Harold Shipman shattered the public's trust in a sacred institution, the family doctor. But in his wake, changes were made. And it was the strength of one woman and the memory of many more that finally brought him down. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe, and join me next time for more history.